At 75 years old, Margaret had just one passion: fishing. Nothing brought her more peace than sitting in her little boat, the gentle waves rocking beneath her, waiting for a catch. One quiet afternoon, as she cast her line into the water, a small voice called out, "Pick me up!" She glanced around, puzzled. No one was there. Shaking her head, she returned to her fishing. Again, the voice came louder this time. "Pick me up!" Margaret looked down and, to her surprise, saw a frog floating on the water's surface. She squinted. "Did you just talk?" "Yes, and listen closely," the frog said. "If you pick me up and give me a kiss, I will transform into the most handsome man you've ever seen. I will be your devoted husband, and your friends will be green with envy." Margaret studied the frog for a long moment. Then, without a word, she reached down, scooped it up, and gently tucked it into her shirt pocket. From inside, the frog's muffled voice protested, "Hey, didn't you hear me? Kiss me and I'll be your charming husband." Margaret chuckled, patted her pocket, and said, "At my age, sweetheart, I'd rather have a talking frog, because with age comes wisdom." Lisa stretched as she climbed out of bed, letting out a satisfied yawn, until she heard a tiny clink on the floor. She looked down and blinked. A penny. "Strange," she muttered, rubbing her eyes. Shrugging it off, she padded into the kitchen to start her morning coffee. Just as she reached for the pot, something tumbled down her leg and hit the tile with a tiny plink. A nickel. Lisa frowned. Okay, that's weird. Still, she carried on, sipping her coffee and heading to the bathroom to brush her teeth. As she leaned over the sink, she heard another clink, this time a dime. Her eyes widened. Now she was officially concerned. "If one more coin drops out of me, I'm calling the doctor." Determined not to panic, she got dressed and started tidying up. That's when she felt a little plop, followed by the unmistakable roll of something down her pant leg. A quarter. That was it. Time to call for professional help. When the doctor picked up, Lisa frantically explained, "Doctor, you won't believe this. First a penny, then a nickel, then a dime, and now a quarter. What's happening to me?" There was a brief silence before the doctor calmly replied, "Relax, Lisa. You're just going through the change." In a quiet little village, there lived an elderly couple who defied all logic. The husband, a sturdy 102-year-old, and his wife, a sprightly 98, were the picture of perfect health. They worked their farm every day with the energy of people half their age, astonishing visitors who passed through. One day, a curious traveler, having heard tales of the couple's remarkable vitality, decided to see for himself. As he wandered onto the farm, he spotted the old man chopping wood, his bare chest glistening with sweat. His muscles, toned and strong, belonged more to a man of 50 than one over a century old. The traveler introduced himself and asked in awe, "I heard you're 102 years old. Is that true?" The old man wiped his brow and grinned. "That's correct." "Well, I must say, you look incredible for your age." The old man chuckled modestly. "Thank you. I have to ask," the traveler continued, "what's your secret? How have you stayed in such amazing shape?" The old man rested his axe against the wood pile and gestured toward the house. "Help me carry this wood inside, and I'll tell you." Intrigued, the traveler picked up an armful of logs and followed the old man into the cozy farmhouse. Once inside, the old man poured them each a cup of tea and settled into a chair. "You see," he began, "I've been married for 75 years, and right from the start, my wife and I made a simple agreement. Whenever we have an argument, the one who loses has to run 5 kilometers. Now, as you can imagine, like any normal husband, I've lost my fair share of arguments, so I've been running almost every day for 75 years. That's why I'm in such great shape." The traveler nodded, impressed, but then frowned. "That makes sense for you, but your wife is just as fit. How do you explain that?" The old man grinned and leaned in. "Oh, that's easy. She usually runs after me to make sure I finish the whole 5. In a quiet little town, there was a small shop that specialized in jade ornaments, but also sold fresh produce on the side. One afternoon, an elderly woman walked in and approached the counter with a polite smile. "Good day, young man," she said. "I'd like 7 kilograms of potatoes, please." The shop owner, happy to make a sale, immediately began weighing and packing the potatoes. But before he could drop them into a bag, the woman gently placed a hand on his wrist. "Oh dear, could you wrap each potato individually?" she asked. The shopkeeper hesitated for a moment but nodded. Business was business after all. He carefully wrapped each potato in brown paper before placing them in a bag. "There you go, madam. Anything else?" "Yes, please. 4 kilograms of onions." The shopkeeper turned to fetch the onions. But before he could start packing them, the woman smiled sweetly. "I'd like those wrapped individually as well." Suppressing a sigh, the shopkeeper got to work, wrapping each onion one by one. When he finally handed her the neatly packed onions, she nodded approvingly. "Lovely. Now, I'll have 7 kilograms of carrots, please." The shopkeeper, already predicting what was coming, narrowed his eyes. "Let me guess. You want them wrapped individually?" The woman beamed. "Oh, that would be grand." Grinding his teeth, the shopkeeper painstakingly wrapped each carrot and packed them into a separate bag. Finally, with the order complete, he handed over the heavy bags and wiped his brow. "Will that be all, madam?" he asked, forcing a polite smile. The elderly woman glanced behind the counter, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. "What's in those crates over there?" The shopkeeper turned, saw what she was pointing at, and immediately turned pale. He straightened his back and shook his head firmly. "Madame," he said, his voice suddenly stern, "those are grapes, and they are not for sale." An old man purchased a well from a clever trickster. The very next day, the trickster stopped the old man on the road and said with a sly grin, "I sold you the well, but not the water in it. If you want to use the water, you'll have to pay me." The old man paused, sizing him up, then calmly replied, "Actually, I was just about to visit you to ask when you plan to remove your water. You see, if you leave it there, I'll have to start charging you rent for using my well as storage." Sometimes trying to outsmart someone can backfire spectacularly. It was a bright Sunday morning, and the church service had just concluded. The congregation was feeling uplifted by the preacher's inspiring sermon when, from the front row, Rick, the wealthiest man in town, rose to his feet. The preacher sighed. This wasn't the first time Rick had something to say. "Make it quick, Rick," he muttered, folding his arms. "Of course, Father," Rick replied, clearing his throat. He turned to address the congregation, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who had everything. "I remember the day I earned my very first dollar," he began. "That very evening, I attended a church meeting much like this one. The speaker talked about his humanitarian efforts, and I was deeply moved. But there was one problem. I only had that single dollar to my name." The audience listened intently as Rick's voice grew more emotional. "I had a tough choice to make. Keep my only dollar or give it to a cause greater than myself. In the end, I gave it all. And let me tell you, my friends, I truly believe that because of that selfless act, God blessed me abundantly. That is why I stand before you today, a millionaire." A hush fell over the room. Some nodded approvingly, others dabbed at their eyes, moved by his heartfelt tale. Rick wiped away a single tear, basking in the admiration of the congregation. Then, from the back of the church, a frail old woman slowly rose to her feet. "Oh yeah?" she called out, her voice sharp and clear. "I dare you to do it again." After years of hard work, Mr. Thompson finally retired and moved into a quiet house near a high school. For the first few weeks, he enjoyed the peaceful life he had always dreamed of, sipping coffee on his porch, reading his newspaper, and basking in the silence. Then, the school year began. Every afternoon, a group of 3 rowdy boys marched down the street, gleefully banging on every trash bin they passed. The metallic clang, clang, clang shattered the once serene neighborhood. At first, Mr. Thompson tried to ignore it, but after a week of this daily percussion performance, he decided it was time for action. The next afternoon, as the boys came down the street, beating away at the bins, Mr. Thompson stepped outside with a warm smile. Boys, you kids are a lot of fun," he said cheerfully. "In fact, when I was your age, I used to do the exact same thing. Tell you what, I'd love for you to keep up the tradition. How about I pay you each $1 every day to keep banging on those bins?" The boys exchanged excited looks. "Really? That's awesome!" For the next few days, the trio gleefully continued their noisy ritual, happily collecting their daily dollar. A few days later, Mr. Thompson met them outside with a sigh. "Fellas, I've got some bad news. This recession is really cutting into my retirement savings. From now on, I can only afford to pay you 50 cents each." The boys grumbled, but agreed. 50 cents was still money after all. A few days later, Mr. Thompson shook his head as they approached. "Boys, I hate to do this, but times are tough. I can only pay you 25 cents each from now on." The leader of the group folded his arms and scowled. "Wait a minute. 25 cents? You think we're gonna waste our time banging on these bins for a lousy quarter? No way. We quit." And just like that, the boys stomped off, never to return. Mr. Thompson chuckled to himself, leaned back in his chair, and enjoyed the blissful silence for the rest of his days. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with the quiet hum of the old clock on the wall. Lying on his deathbed, Harold knew his time was running out. His beloved wife, Margaret, sat by his side, holding his frail hand, her eyes brimming with sorrow. With a deep breath, Harold mustered the strength to speak. "Honey, there's something I need to ask of you before I go." Margaret squeezed his hand. "You can count on me, dear. Whatever it is, I promise I'll do it." Harold's voice trembled with emotion. "When I'm gone, I want you to marry my friend Jacob." Margaret's eyes widened in shock. "Jacob? But I thought you couldn't stand him." A faint smile crept across Harold's face as he gazed into her eyes. With his final ounce of strength, he whispered, "That's precisely why."